Well, thanks for taking time, especially during lunch. I was talking to them, I've been the last guy before lunch, that's a hard gig. The first guy during lunch is probably going to be a little bit harder, I think. So, start with a disclaimer. This story about taking a grassroots approach to achieve DevOps, I think the taking the grassroots approach is the focus. I don't know how much we've achieved yet. It feels like we're at the very beginning of this. Sometimes when I tell this story, I feel like I'm kind of having a parade to celebrate making it to the starting line. But essentially, what this is a story of what we learned about the people and the culture side as we try to make this happen. So working with our different partners, getting the right perspective on how these things work, what we could do to change the environment, and tackling that piece that seems to be the biggest hurdle up front, which is getting people's minds right. So it basically breaks down into four phases. First, having that moment of realization and figuring out what's going on, that you may be suboptimal, not necessarily bad, but not optimal. Then finding your leverage point, what you can do to change that, finding people to work with so you can change it, because that's the whole thing, right? If it's still us and them, it's never going to happen. And then figuring out how to push on, we call it bending rules and minds, within the boundaries of what you have to do as a company. So I'm hoping that out of this, you'll come back with something, right? We're looking at it, I'm looking at it from the perspective of a 160-year-old now fintech company. So we've got a lot of structure, a lot of, you could call it rigidity, but a lot of culture that's there that we're not just going to go in a conference room and change. So part of this is for people to come away with some semblance of hope if you're in that same situation and looking at this and thinking, I don't know how we're going to get this done. If you are getting it done, then maybe it's energy to keep getting it done and keep fighting the battle. Maybe it's a different perspective. I am an ops guy, I'll talk about that in a little bit. I go to a lot of these and I feel like a zebra amongst a herd of gazelles. Most of my career being consolidated into one bullet item on their presentation, so that can be a challenge. And then maybe there's some tools in here that will help as well. If you don't come away with anything, grab me in the hallway, we'll figure something out. So this is my background. We have a local radio host, I'm from Denver. We have a local radio host in Denver who says he likes to tell you where he sits so that you'll know where he stands. This is where I sit. Ops guy for 20 plus years, ITIL background, so a lot of ITSM, doing the ITIL processes. Spent a lot of time in highly regulated industries, so from healthcare, payer, provider, medical device manufacturing, now financial technology, all highly regulated, right? So the nickname Dr. No may or may not apply. I definitely spend a lot of my time with auditors, internal, external, international, but definitely highly regulated, lots and lots of rules. I've spent 6 years with Western Union, and we have a shared operations, IT operations and infrastructure group and ITSM group that supports multiple dev groups around the world and through our organization. So that's kind of the basis for how we look at the world. Now, my story starts like a lot of people's, I think, in the DevOps space, which is you hear the magical stories of these guys, all the unicorns they call them, right? And they all, started from nothing, and they're 13 years old or they're 7 years old, and you look at this, and if you're in a company like mine where you're old, you look at this and go, wow, that'd be nice if we could all, put on our hoodies and text each other and meet in the conference room and figure this out, but it's not that easy. But that does begin a theme, right? We start looking at this and saying, I don't know how I'm going to do this. This is huge. I don't know what I'm going to do, and you get into this kind of despair loop. So same thing. We heard about thousands of deployments a day or a minute. We heard about companies where you had to deploy on your first day. You have to deploy every time you go to the water cooler. All this really cool stuff. Extra sensory monitoring that would tell you weeks in advance if anything was going to go wrong. All really neat stuff. But then you look at it and say, okay, now let me turn around and look at my environment. And does it match? These are our founders, guys like Hiram and Ezra. One of them, top right, is Ezra Cornell. Cornell University. Top left, for a while, Thomas Edison, right? The light bulb guy worked for us. So I'm not talking venerable, I'm talking ancient old, 160 years old, 164 years old. And so you look at that and you kind of start feeling sorry for yourself if you're in that mode, but it's really part of this theme is understanding, okay, well, this is who we are. We very quickly, well, not very quickly, but over the years became a mix of old and new things, grew by acquisition. But in the beginning, we were fairly innovative, right? We were the first to, one of the first companies in the Dow Jones average, right? And of the first 11, us and Pacific or Union Pacific Railroad are left. We introduced the commercial fax in the 1930s. One of the first commercial communication satellites, Westar, in the 1970s. So there was some innovation there. It wasn't like we started old, but we definitely got to the point that a lot of companies our size get to, which is you start to divvy up into silos, you start growing by acquisition, maybe you don't get that acquisition completely integrated, so you end up in an environment that seems very siloed, very restricted, and just old. So 2010, Hikmet Ersek became our CEO and started talking about this concept of transformation. He also started talking about the customer. 2012, we added David Thompson as our CIO, and again, just more of the meme of transformation and innovation and how do we think about the customer. We were based entirely on transactions previously, right? How many transactions we do today, how many transactions we lose when that system went down, how many transactions are we doing next year? Based on these two guys kind of bringing this innovation mentality and an understanding of where everybody's going today, which is you've got to understand that customer, you've got to get in front of that customer, in addition to our regulatory requirements where we not only have to know our customer to satisfy our customer, we have to know our customer to make sure they're not a terrorist or a money launderer or human trafficking or something like that. So we started talking about different things, no longer transactions. We started talking about net promoter score or customer sat and began tracking that on a regular basis. And it kind of opened the door for some of the thinking around DevOps. Also, we integrated different development teams that were working on things like mobile apps, right? And our web presence, which require that faster cadence of development and deployment. So as we started to look at this, one of our biggest demographics is migrants. And one of the stats that our guys like to throw around is if you took all the migrants in the world, migrant workers and such, put them in one place, they'd represent the 5th largest country on the planet. And so that's really what we began to identify with. Not a million transactions today, but who is that guy and why does he need this money and how does it help him? So that said, we're still looking at a global team of 10,000 people speaking more than 35 different languages scattered across the globe. So again, we're not getting into even a virtual conference room to just sort this out, right? This is a big collection of different cultures, and it's trying to figure out how can we still make progress there. So the first phase for me was to gain this realization of first what DevOps was, how it related to us, and then to just understand, this concept of not optimal in my mind. And I read the Phoenix Project first, but it was actually a little bit too close to reality for me, and I identified too closely with the characters in there. And so it actually took me reading The Goal to kind of get this in perspective. For anybody who hasn't read the books, the Phoenix Project is basically just an IT version of The Goal, which really focused on the theory of constraints and lean manufacturing principles. So it's about dealing with your bottlenecks. In the Phoenix Project, they represent the bottleneck as a guy. His name's Brent. And if you don't know Brent, you might be Brent. He's the guy who knows where everything is. He's Zeke in that video from this morning. That's Brent, right? Everything runs through him. He needs to be on every fix. He's got to be on every deployment. So that, for me, I read that, and my blood pressure went too high because I knew all those people, and so when I read the Goal, it was a little bit more focused on manufacturing, and then I could detach, and you began to understand the perspective you need. So first of all, it was realizing, okay, our deployments are suboptimal. Not nightmares, but not optimal. And for us, I used the phrase, any landing you can walk away from is a good landing. That was kind of our quality measure for some of our deployments in the past. Well, we didn't crash anything, right? We didn't cost any transactions, so it was okay. The fact that it took us 10 hours and we had to redeploy it 3 times, we kind of brushed that under the rug. I think, a lot of people do. And that works when you have one thread of development. As we began to pick up different products, right? And we're going B2B and B2C and C2B and C2C, and you get up to a portfolio that's got hundreds of products in it, that becomes unmanageable. You can do one 10-hour, 3-attempt deployment per window. You can't do 50. So that was kind of a realization. I think that also, our deployments were these long, drawn-out phone calls with just everybody kind of gathering around and saying, okay, I'm going to do my part, clickety, clickety, click, right? And a whole lot of, how we doing? And that was just not bad. We got the code out, but it just wasn't as good as we could do. So part of that review of the books is looking at that constraints theory, right? And really what dawned on me was that DevOps was that lean manufacturing for code for us. And it's looking at from the concept to the delivery of the product, that whole line and where all your bottlenecks are. And it's not about fixing one, right? I think that's why we struggle sometimes with projects like this, is if you fix that one bottleneck, all you're doing is revealing the next bottleneck. So one, that leads us to more despair, right? Because I got to fix everything at once is what you're telling me. Yes and no, but it's important because I think sometimes we in IT think, well, I'm going to buy this product, solve that problem, and the world's going to be awesome. And if you don't look at that whole pipeline, it's not going to be awesome. You're just going to remove one bottleneck, find the next one, and you're probably not going to make friends with the guys that are downstream of you, right? Because you just opened up your pipeline and flooded them with work in progress. So that was the realization I had, and I began to look at our processes in a different way and really begin to examine, okay, well, who's complaining the most? Who do we all say, well, they're holding us up? And view those as bottlenecks rather than just, well, that team doesn't know what they're doing or this team is faster than that team. So I'd like to say I thought of this at the time when everything was going haywire and a Asian proverb popped into my head, but it really came to me later, and this is attributed to different cultures, but essentially it's the story of a stone cutter, and this guy is chipping away at the base of this tower, as I guess stone cutters do. I guess you finish a tower and then you trim off the extra or something. And he's chipping away and he sees some powerful guy ride by on a horse, some aristocrat, king, whatever, and he thinks, wow, that guy's got it made, right? I have no power, there's nothing I can do, I'm just sitting here, my back is sore, he's riding a horse, telling people what to do, his life is awesome. So as these stories go, poof, now he's the aristocrat, right? Now he's riding his horse, he's telling people what to do, he's got this great fur coat, and he's loving life. Until the sun starts to beat down on him and it starts to get hot, and now he's thinking, man, I'm not as powerful as I thought I was. The sun is killing me. I got to take my jacket off. I got to go find a place to hide in the shade. What I really need to be is the sun. Again, insert sparkles, poof, he's the sun. So this goes on in this cycle of, man, it's not here, it's that one, it's that one. Goes through from the sun to being a cloud that shades people from the sun to being the wind that moves the cloud out of the way. And then when the wind is finally blowing, he sees the people that he's torturing with his wind powers go into the stone tower, right? And so it's that cycle of, okay, you look at it and you say, okay, well, anybody can change the system, but you got to recognize it's a system. And you have to realize that everybody in that cycle has a piece where they can change the outcome. It's kind of like that, the butterfly effect theory, that theory with butterfly flaps its wings in Taipei and a hurricane happens somewhere across the world. It's recognizing your opportunity as the butterfly, I think, is what hit me with this. And I wish it was a more poetic moment, but it really just came to me when I was building the slide. But it fits, so it works. So that kind of brings you to this perspective question, right? Where am I in that circle? And it's really not consequential whether you're the stonecutter or the aristocrat or the son or whatever. It's really about getting to a view of your entire pipeline. In the Phoenix project, there's a point where the wise sage CEO, whatever he is, grabs the beleaguered IT manager, takes him up to the catwalk in this factory and points out some of the things that you can't see from the ground, right? You see that station over there, well, that station used to work like this, and this station was a bottleneck. And it's that kind of vision that I think helps get to how can we change this, but also we're pretty good in IT ops at despair, right? I mean, how familiar is, you don't give us enough money, our infrastructure's old, development's always throwing stuff over the fence. We've kind of perfected that art of the martyr, if you will. So getting to this level is like realizing, all right, well, it's not just my world, it's other people's worlds, it's tools, and then you begin to look for what you could influence. And that's one of the keys, is trying to figure out in this system, what do I automatically have influence over? What can I influence kind of as a secondary? Because it's not just, I own this tool, I have this budget. It might be, I just went through an exercise with that development team. We had a 3-day nightmare outage and we all banded together and saved the day. That's a good time to ask them for something, right? If you save the day, not if they save the day. But it's looking at the system like that and seeing who else is involved and where can I have impact. So that's where you talk about finding a lever. For us, the lever was automating deployments. It was doing something that we needed to do anyways as an example and to try to open the door for some other conversations. So the two quotes here are interesting because this one, rid yourself of old patterns, is really, if you're trying to change something, don't get focused on trying to stop what's happening today. Focus on what should happen next. Focus on the right way to do something. And for us, it manifested itself in doing a pilot rather than trying to fix everything. And then do nothing that is of no use is really about energy management. A lot of this is, what I learned in going through this was, these are systems, they're complex, and it takes a long time to change them by brute force. If you change them through a grassroots movement, you've got to conserve your energy. You have to get energy from other people who's willing to invest time, take risk with you, even be open to conversation. So that nothing that is of no use is pretty important as you go through this process. And again, we're just going through this process, but already out of the gate, I can see this and my team is recognizing it. So what do we control? You look at your pipeline, you'll see even our pipeline slide is very infrastructure centric, right? I'm looking at monitoring and network and DBA, and somewhere out there is QA and development somewhere. But it's really about looking at, okay, well, let's see the pipeline and who's overworked and where's the big stack of work in progress. What can I influence there? Can I help them? Do I know them? Do I owe them a favor? They owe me a favor. And also, what's meaningful for your organization? Part of the energy management is you've got to get approval at least, or at least tacit approval for what you're doing. So part of that is figuring out the currency for your organization and spending that wisely to move this kind of an effort forward. What we found was that this look at the world was our version of currency. For the pilot we chose on automation, we had an agreement with one of our vendors which kind of eliminated hours spent deploying as a variable. It was a fixed cost. So for us, we shifted that numbers game to look at how many manual steps did we eliminate, right? So this number from 357 down to 11, that was our battle cry. That's 97% fewer opportunities for my guys to make a mistake when they're typing a long command or directory path or whatever it is. So it wasn't really about we're going to spend fewer hours. For us, it was more about we're going to have less of a chance to impact production. So that was solely on the ops side, right? This wasn't let's have an enterprise-wide DevOps initiative. This was I'm going to do this so I stop making mistakes. And then as a side benefit, you know, obviously we trimmed 2 hours down to 18 minutes. Now there's an asterisk on that because that wasn't the full deploy time. That was our participation. So that was us sitting on the phone for 6 hours waiting for someone to say, okay, go, typing 300 commands or 200 commands, and then waiting for another 3 hours, and then typing another couple of hundred commands. But it made a statement. People can see, and especially our execs could see, oh, that looks like dollars to me, right? One, you're causing less outage time. Two, you're going much faster, smells like savings. It also allowed us to leverage that as pressure to our peers. So when they got on the phone and said, okay, you guys can start. Hey, we're done. You done already? I was going to go get dinner. Well, we're done, sorry. They started to ask, well, how'd you do that? What's going on? So it really is currency. It's like once we got that, we got more attention, we got more people that would partner up with us, and they began to understand the bottom line dollar impact of this. We were removing dollars from our costs, and now other people are looking to do the same. So part of it was finding the right partner to do this with, and in reality, the first time we picked the wrong partner. It wasn't that they didn't want to achieve the same thing, it was that their vision of how to achieve it was so different from ours. They were looking for us to solve the problem and them to supervise. And, like I said, we both wanted to get there, but there wasn't much investment from their side in terms of getting there. We since worked to find another partner who is, and when I say partners, I'm talking about we have, 100 development groups across the organization. We're kind of going piece by piece and saying, okay, well, you guys on the back end, you do a release per quarter. I'm pretty sure you're not going to be interested in DevOps right out of the gate. Let me talk to these guys who are doing the mobile app. You're really interested. The fraud apps or the risk apps are very interested because trying to keep up with all the fraudsters and all the schemes that are out there, you have to keep that pace. So we found a partner that was willing to invest. And we're really right now still in the early stages of this, but our first automation attempts, we automated the deployment, and then immediately they changed how they do deployment. So we had to go back and adjust that. Right now, we're talking with another partner to say, okay, well, let's talk about how you work, how we work, and what the outcome is, and where we could help. And it really comes down to this energy management thing I talked about. It's like in aerobatics, they talk about energy management. You trade speed for altitude, and so when you dive, you go faster, you climb, you lose speed. That's a lot of this. It's trying to maintain that energy and keep it moving forward. And for finding the right internal partners, it's really about who's listening, right? Don't go start this conversation with somebody you haven't talked to in 6 months, is what we learned, because then you're going to have to explain the whole concept of DevOps and start from scratch. Try to find somebody who you work well with, and then figure out who to help. So the book picture I like, you want to help the guy on the left before you help the guy on the right. You're looking for a Band-Aid before a tourniquet, just because you don't have that much energy, right? This isn't a top-down for us. It isn't a top-down mandate. It's really trying to get partners to help us. So the other side you have to choose wisely on is the vendor side. And this is not so much about which vendor, but it's about the relationship with the vendor. And so much of this is about relationships, but the vendor relationship really in this one centers on that trust, right? Do you have a vendor who's willing to tell you, I could do that, I probably shouldn't do that with this tool? That's a big barrier to get over, right? Because they all want to tell you, yeah, my tool can do that, and it probably can, but is it meant for that, and is it good at that? That's the question. So this was an important one, and also to leverage what you have. If you're big, leverage big, and if you're small, leverage small. We're reasonably big, so our leverage point is, okay, well, you'd probably like to be in Western Union if you're not here already, so what can you bring to the table to help us with this activity? Or you're here already, you definitely want to be the guy standing with us at the finish line with the champagne and saying, these are the guys that help us get here. So using that to your advantage, we learned is really helpful. If you're small, then you've got an opportunity to be a little bit more flexible probably with open source and things like that, which we don't. So after identifying, what does the system look like? Where can we affect change and who's going to work with us? We got down to, getting to work and starting these conversations about what are we going to do. And I'll start with, we say bend rules and minds, but in the vernacular of our old telegraphs, right, we're a fintech company. We will never, ever, ever break or bend the rules. Stop. Those are not the rules I'm talking about. The rules I'm talking about are what we create internally to get all this work done. And in those instances, it's important to understand, one, let's not go crazy, let's respect the freedom we're trying to generate here. Two, let's not get hung up in the despair loop and say, well, we can't because it's hard. Let's challenge each other when we get into that level of trust where we need to be, and then let's understand rules versus principles. So first of all, respecting the freedom. You say agile, and in some scenarios, people use that as an excuse to test in production. Yeah, that's not really agile. I think some people call that agile with a capital FR, fragile, but we had to balance that. We're going to take some of the weight off, some of the overhead off, but we can't just go crazy. The other end, though, is too much control, right? The other end is we just do exactly what all the auditors want, which is lock everything down to the point where you can't move forward, and there's got to be a balance between. The other exercise is kind of the what-if exercise. Like I said, ops will get into this cycle of, we can't do it, we don't have any money, dev is just killing us, and you got to get them past that and say, well, let's pretend like we could. I used to joke with my project teams, you're right, we can't do it. Let's just lie down on the ground. We'll wait for the vultures to come and peck at our eyes because we're dead. But you got to snap people out of what we couldn't do before, what we've always done before. And then the difference between rules and principle, critical difference. Rules, and this is just my opinion, but rules are for those guys, kindergartners and people in correctional facilities, because they are not trusted to follow principles. If you look at all the Agile Manifesto and the 3 ways, it's about we value this over this, we try for this, we want to achieve this. It's not about you can't or you must or the specificity of you got to have a VP approval for X. Well, you really need to have the right person approving it, and you can take that to any auditor and say, yeah, here's the right person approving it, here's how we approved it. That doesn't mean you have to go slow. And then once you get to that level, hopefully, and you're understanding that we're basing this on what we want to achieve and goals versus rules and principles versus rules, then you get a better environment where you can challenge your teammates. We actually sat down with this new team that we're working with and began to have this conversation of, well, we can't do this because you won't let us do X. And we came up with our own principle and said, look, let's not say we can't do anything until we actually prove we can't, right? You can't do this because of the regulators. Well, you know what? Let's find out. Let's see what they would allow and what they wouldn't allow. But it's the difference between the language we started with was, well, those guys are killing us. They're holding us up. Dev's throwing stuff over the fence to, hey guys, what if this? Do you think you could do this? Would it be possible? And that level of trust coming up so that you're not hostile for one, but you're also not guarded in what you can and can't do with these folks. So the thing that began to form for me, one, it's a system, you're trying to change a system. Two, you're not necessarily doing it with a lightning bolt from above. You're doing it with a grassroots movement and you're trying to change it kind of organically. And this quote, this one did come to me. This wasn't an after the fact add-on. This quote about water from Bruce Lee made me think about that, right? Water is a very effective change agent. Just ask the Grand Canyon, right? It finds the path of least resistance and conserves energy by doing that, and then is able to make changes to the landscape, the drywall in my office at home, whatever it is. It's very good at getting in places and making change. But the concept here is, as I put this together and we as a team thought about what we were doing, this was it right here. It was understand the system, right? Find that lowest point, the point where you can make change, conserve your energy because you need it and you don't have, a badge or a gun. You really got to get people to come along with you. And then just keep going, right? Keep looking for that next small piece you can change. So like I said, this is not by any means done. I feel like, again, we've just got to the starting line, but we're at the starting line now with a partner who is willing to invest time and risk and trust. And it feels like we're getting ready to really take off. In addition, we've begun to automate components of this, and they haven't come together in the magical one-click 10,000 deployments a day, but we're starting to see that speed pick up as well. So thank you for your time. I appreciate you coming, especially with all the lunch dishes out there. Hopefully everybody got to eat, or if you don't, get over there. Any questions for me? You either have to scream or make it to the mic.
So it was a really good presentation. Just a quick question in terms of your vendors. It's not necessarily in their interest to get faster, cheaper, quicker, more efficient. How did you handle that from a kind of, we're on a T&M engagement, we've moved to fixed price, and how did you kind of really structure those conversations with your vendors to make it a much more compelling argument for them to go to a DevOps continuous delivery framework?
Yeah, so we had a lot of conversations about how we're probably not going to change the volume of work. We're going to make it easier and faster, but we're probably just going to end up filling that funnel. A lot of our agreements are in that vein where we don't have a set capacity, but we're dealing with resource units, and on the infrastructure side especially, we're telling the vendors, this is going to help you because essentially it means you can do more work. And who in the room thinks that I'm likely to have less work to do next year, right? So instead of us complaining at you for why can't you handle all this, it gives you that space that we can increase that work. One of the examples I used was the difference between my guys on the phone for 6 hours running one deployment and maybe them sitting there with 5 deployments going on, and because they're automated, they're simply going, okay, this one's ready to go to the next stop, I'll click next. This one looks like it's having a problem, I'm gonna go ahead and pick up the phone, maybe we'll roll that one back and go to this one and this one. So that was the way we sold it. Again, that was mostly to the infrastructure side and operations.
Hello. How much did you change your processes, internal processes?
So on the development side, we're still working on that. So we've got every flavor you can imagine. We've got some groups that are agile, some groups that are completely waterfall, and really what we're doing right now is we're integrating the processes to break down that I walk to the end and then I toss it at operations. So some of the changes have already occurred because they're beginning to get us involved earlier in builds of non-production environments, deployments of non-production code, but we haven't made significant changes yet because we picked a group that was already in an agile mode. What we're really having to do on our side is change our processes on the ops side and say, I know you used to just wait for a ticket to come in to do a deployment to an environment, but you're going to have to go sit in this Scrum meeting, right? You're going to have to go listen to these guys and hear what they're doing and understand where they want to go so that when it comes to us, it's not the first time we've heard it. Any other questions? You can find me. I'm wandering around, or send me an email. Happy to talk to you. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate your time.